All right. Hi, everyone who is just joining us for this conversation about just accounting and just action. We'll give a second for folks to come into the Zoom webinar today, but just really appreciate you all joining for this conversation. All right. I'm seeing folks coming in. So let's get started. I'm Rachel Quidno. I'm the program director at Strong Towns, and we're here today to talk about just accounting and just action. This is a conversation hosted by the Just Accounting for Health Coalition. Strong Towns is one of the project partners in this effort. Other partners include Urban 3, the Racial Justice Coalition of Asheville, and the UNC Asheville Department of Health and Wellness. And this research is supported by a generous grant from the Dogwood Health Trust. Thank you to them. So a little bit of background on this. Together, we project partners have been part of an 18-month research and advocacy process exploring issues of tax assessment inequity. Away from the public view in cities and towns across the country, the property tax burden is shifted from people who own larger, expensive properties to people that own smaller and cheaper homes, who is often less affluent, often people of color. This broken assessment system subsidizes a development pattern that is bankrupting our towns and cities. And our research has used Western North Carolina as a case study to explore this problem, why it's occurring, and what we can do about it. But we know that this is a national issue occurring in towns and cities across the country. Today, Joe Unequivocally is going to be sharing a summary of the findings from our 18 months of research. And you'll soon have the opportunity to read our full report. We'll be emailing that out to you guys when it's released in the next few weeks here. After Joe shares that summary, we're going to hear from Rob Thomas, who's the executive director of the Racial Justice Coalition, about their work to address housing inequities and reparations in Asheville. And then we'll have a conversation with our special guest, Leah Rothstein, co-author of the new book, Just Action: How to Challenge Segregation Enacted Under the Color of Law, to learn even more about taking action around these issues. And I'll give you some more background on those speakers when we get to their portion. And then finally, we'll hope to have some time for Q&A at the end. And since I know someone's going to ask, we are recording this. You'll get the recording sent out to you via email probably on Monday. So let me now introduce Joe Unequivocally. Joe is the founder and principal of Urban 3, an urban planner imagining new ways to think about and to visualize data, land use, and urban design. He founded Urban 3 to explain and visualize market dynamics created by land and tax use policies. And Joe's going to share foundational research and findings from the Just Accounting for Health project. So Joe, go for it. And you are muted.
Yes, I think I've learned by now. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for this. I'm gonna blast through a lot of information. Some of you all are familiar with our work, some of you aren't, and what led up to this partnership that I have listed on the bottom, and I'll come back to this as well. But our company focuses on economic analysis. We do work in every state across the country, 45 states, but we see and work on property taxes. All along the way, we see biases in the system, things that people say is professional judgment that may or not necessarily be true as a mathematical analysis or even follow legal process or standards of the assessment. But this is a model that we did of tax productivity of Kansas City. Actually presented this with Chuck in Kansas City, and our client Kauffman Foundation asked us to analyze redlining. Redlining happened in every city every city of 50,000 and more on a map from 1934 to 1968. But cities less than that still follow the same biases. So basically, people were selected geographically by these four colors of green is good, blue is desirable, yellow is declining, and red is hazardous. And hazardous was based on your ethnicity or your color of your skin. So in Kansas City, it wasn't a big surprise. You could see when you cross this one street called Troost Avenue, it just drops off immediately. Now, remember, we stopped doing redlining in 1968, but east of Troost Avenue, you can see how it's heavily redlined. So flash forward to today, 50 years after redlining happened, and you apply the redline map to the economic model, you can see that every district from green to blue to yellow to red takes a haircut in value as you go down it. Now, while we were doing this, Our city and our county, both here in Asheville, adopted reparations, which is part of Rob's work, who we'll hear about in a second. So as a resident of our community, we thought it was kind of interesting that our community led in the New York Times to discuss redlining and to find reparations. I also live here and know that we don't really lift a finger to do much. So I volunteered our company to analyze the redlining effect, but also because of our history of redlining in Asheville. But one of the things that happened that year in 2021 is a reassessment happened. So we pivoted and looked at the reassessment. So reassessment equitable analysis starts with the racial analysis. So we mapped the race data of our community. This is a map of it with a Black population in green, white population in blue. And there's this big hole that you can see in our community, which is the Biltmore estate. When you zoom in, this is really the kind of the easy canary in the coal mine. Is Biltmore Forest is predominantly white, and it's also a really big subdivision developed by the Vanderbilts. It just so happened that Sidney Powell lived in the Biltmore estate area, or Biltmore Village area, or forest area. And this is my friend Reggie has this house in Shiloh. So just looking at the houses, here's Reggie's house and here's Sydney's house. Sydney's is nothing to write home about. It's just a ranch burger. But there are data points that you can look at to see where the problems are. So first is the land value per acre. This is fair, that the land value per acre should be more in Biltmore Forest than it is in Shiloh. That checks out. But if you look at the other numbers, like the building value per square foot, how on God's green earth is Reggie's house worth more than Sydney's house per square foot? And then we ask the assessor and you immediately get biases. One is that Sydney's house has more square footage, so therefore it's less value. But architecture isn't like toilet paper. It doesn't get cheaper by the bulk. She's got 4 bathrooms, Reggie's got 1. Bathrooms are expensive. So that shouldn't be this way. Secondly, that's going to result in Reggie's neighborhood paying more taxes per acre than Sydney's. But here's the kicker. In North Carolina, our assessment goes every 4 years, our reassessment. So Reggie's neighborhood is moving faster, or Reggie's property is moving faster than Sydney's in value. And on the property card, she's renovated and Reggie hasn't. So this to me, it just smacks of bias in decision-making, but also I want to question the mathematics behind this. While we were doing this work, Chris Berry's report from the University of Chicago, and please go online and read this article on the New York Times, but also pull the report. They issued a lot of these crazy charts. I call them J curves because it kind of looks like a J laying on its side. But the lower the value, the higher your assessment. The higher the value, the lower the assessment. So one of our colleagues here, Ori Baber, ran the math for our community, and here's Buncombe County. So basically, if you buy a house for $225,000, it gets assessed at $225,000. If you buy a house of less value, you get overassessed or overcharged in taxes. If you buy a house of greater value, you get a little discount. So that translates into a $7 million discount. So the first rule of reparations is do no harm. You should stop this immediately and not do this reassessment. And that's what we challenged our county to do. Now, they didn't listen. They just continued with their assessment, but we showed the math of that. Now, speaking of assessment, know your laws. So we'll help you. We're working with Strong Towns on a list of things to look at, but you start with the laws. Don't be intimidated by them. But our Constitution in our state requires a uniform level of taxation, that we're all taxed equally. Now, what we usually translate that to when you have a high wealth house and a low wealth house is that we all have the same millage rate, which we're all taxed at, let's call it 6 mils across. So we're all paying the same tax rate. Well, that's fine. But if you have it sitting on top of this, what it's going to do is it's going to distort taxation, and you're going to have an overcharge on some folks, and you're going to have an undercharge on another. That is not uniform. So we're essentially not following the Constitution in our state. Secondly, there's the laws that say that your market value should equal your tax value. I'm not going to get into all the detail. There's other examples that we've done with Strong Towns earlier, but I'll just give you 5 examples. This is a house in a low wealth neighborhood, and this is what the computer set it at. So all communities have a computer model that runs the tax value through the county. We're no different. So this is what the computer said it was worth. It sold that year in 2021 for that price. So there's your test. That's what the market paid for that house. So be it not for that sale, that individual would have overpaid for their government 16%. Now, to the assessor's credit, they reassessed the property and it brought it down to 100%. That checks out. The human corrected what the computer messed on. Here's another example. The computer underassessed it and the human brought it up. Now, to show you the bias in the system, This is a wealthy house. So let's go to that one. I have to change scales for that. So here's what it was purchased for. Here's what the computer had it assessed at. So the computer is off by half. If my child brought home a test score of 49, I'd probably have a conversation with the child, but also with the teacher to figure out what's going on. We need to interrogate our mathematical model to see why is it doing this. Now, here's where the human bias comes in. The human had the test score sitting right there, and here's what the reassessment was. Again, still a discount of 35%, 36%. I mean, that's a tremendous discount. Why didn't the first two houses get a 36% discount? Here's another example, what it sold for, what the computer had it at. And this one's my favorite here. The moral courage to bring it up one whole percentage point is reprehensible. Like, why? Come on now. So there is a discount that's being forged here. Somebody's got to pick up that tab. So looking at that house on the far left, that person's paying full freight, and you have how many people have to cover the bill? So 5 people have to cover the bill for one. For those of you that are familiar with our work, we did this model across the whole county as a computer model. You can see this person being absolutely screwed right there. It's like that. Use the model, use the software to tell you what's going on. But again, back to biases. Here's my office. And if we walk across the street to my neighborhood, notice how it jumps up in the middle of my neighborhood. When we talk to the assessor, they mentioned that that's a different tax neighborhood code. So inside my neighborhood, there are different neighborhood codes, and you can see that results on the map. So just to show you on the street, when you cross the property line, there's basically a 200% difference in the real estate. The first question is, who drew this map? Why is it there? Does this at all feel familiar to you with a redlining map? These systems were put in place to disproportionately affect one territory versus another. We need to interrogate that. Secondly, when you go back to Reggie's neighborhood, and this is how all the neighborhood codes are level. And so the thinking is, well, Joe, it's not our fault. You moved into Reggie's neighborhood. You set the new market value. That's what the law is, right? What the new market will pay for that house. That's called gentrification. Got it? Okay, fair enough. Why is it when you cross the street and you go into Biltmore Forest, there's been 2 transactions, but no effect on that neighborhood? That is showing human bias and how they're applying laws differently on one side of the street versus the other. And that needs to be addressed. So it actually made us ask questions. Here's a property, 22 acres with a 16,000 square foot house on it. And just, again, you can just go in your assessor's files and find this stuff. Go into the wealthier neighborhoods and you'll see this. This is a house that was in 2011, it was valued at $4 million. Somehow by 2021, it's lost $1 million. So how in this hot real estate market are we losing value? So again, Ori ran a model on whether it's gaining or losing value. And inside the wealthiest neighborhood in probably our state, 55% of the houses are losing value for a net loss of 40 million bucks. So that means they're losing tax revenue out of that property. So we did the math on that. So Reggie's neighborhood has overpaid $1.5 million, and the Biltmore Forest neighborhood is underpaid $4.4 million. So as you continue your conversation, just realize we're playing checkers in the middle of the chess match. There's other rules that are at play that you need to start digging deeper on. And of course, we ran the model of whether or not it's affecting our redlining map. And sure enough, you're seeing redline neighborhoods accelerating far past green line neighborhoods. And just before we close this little piece here, Ori actually took the assessor's exam. This is a screenshot that he shared with me from taking the test. Do you notice the 4 colors? So they are still being trained in this system that there's some sort of God has delivered this rule of there's 4 colors matter and it needs to be interrogated. And then we did. We called up Larry Clark at the assessors organization and said, you need to stop doing this. So if you see something, reach out. In the assessor's defense, they just didn't think this through. So our county did move forward with a rebate program, which is nice. They're giving some money back, but question whether or not it's sufficient. So here's all of our county's property taxes and commercial and residential properties. This is what they gave into the rebate program, which is insignificant. So this is the subsidy that's out there in this model that I just showed you. It's about a $7 million subsidy. This is what they gave back in the city and the county rebate program. So there's still a deficit of $6.5 million. So $6.5 million from one assessment to the next, that's 4 years, that totals $26 million that is owed to the reparations fund in the process. We also found discovery as another law that if you find new value, you're supposed to claw it back and get that get that value. This was a law that was created in 1941 and they weren't following it. So here's an example. This is a house of its value. This is what it sold for, 1.7 million. They found a 2,000 square foot finished basement with basically all bathrooms and kitchens in it. So that's $400,000 of value, new value. So you're supposed to claw back. They owe $17,000. Just with 2% of the property, they found $4.4 million of uncollected clawback, which translates into 111 school teachers not funded. Again, more money that should go into the reparations or making equality happen. So here's some math. We remember high school. So if we're losing 4.4 million on 2%, what's the remaining 98%? That's what this looks like. So that translates into this math. So let's solve for N. That means my community is not collecting $216 million. So, okay, fine. Maybe Joe, you're a little crazy. That's a little too far. Let's just cut it in half. Half of that is $111 million, plus remember the 26 million I just told you about. So basically my county, just with residential real estate is foregone $138 million. When you look at our total property tax bill, it's 220. So we're basically giving away 60% of our property taxes. That's insane. We reached out to the Dogwood Health Trust to say, well, this is what's happening in our county. They've helped us form this organizational group with the partners who are here today to take it across the 17 county area outside of Asheville. It's a lot of real estate. It's about $100 billion worth of real estate, which translates into $1 billion of property tax. We're now releasing this report. This is what this video is about, the results of this. And really simply, 44% of all property taxes of the entire lot are the value that's out there. When you go across the model of the 17 counties, we've pulled the data and basically doing the same, it's a quintile analysis. What you're going to do is you're going to get all of the houses, you're going to sort them into a geographic area. So this is our county, and this is kind of a cartoon of how it operates, taking those houses and kind of lining them up from low to high. You want to order the houses and then divide it by 10, the 10 different quadrants of value, and find the median house in each of those segments. They should be uniform, right? The median of each quintile should be equal. That's the way that the rule is supposed to be for the assessment, the median decile. We plot those on a chart, and what ends up happening is this. This is that J curve that I was telling you about. This is Buncombe County. So this is the bottom 10% of housing. This is the top 10% of housing. This becomes the new median. So these folks are overtaxed. These folks are undertaxed. That is regressive in the system. So if this is what's happening in Buncombe County, we have evidence of the regressivity, evidence of the non-uniformity. What's going on with applying the state law in the 17 other counties? So here's Buncombe County. Notice the chart. Here are the 17 other counties and the results of what we're seeing. The same pattern exists in each and every one of these. Now, in defense of our assessor, this is a practice that people just haven't interrogated. Also, these other counties haven't been following discovery either. So it's not like it's an alone thing. It's just there are habits and biases in the system that move forward. This is the definition of systemic biases. Across the whole sample, you see Buncombe County, for every dollar of highest value homes, the lowest value homes are paying in my county 10 cents more per dollar versus the wealthiest. The lowest are paying more in taxes. The one that really stands out is McDowell County by a factor of 2.15. You know, that's reprehensible to charge the lowest value folks the most in their taxes. This is what this looks like as a bar chart. So McDowell County is the worst. Clay County is coming in second, but the average across the sample is $1.40 for every dollar that the wealthiest pays. So this destabilizes the lowest wealth properties across the system. You're overcharging. Also at a granular level, this happens at neighborhoods. This is inside Asheville, in different neighborhoods, and which ones are predominantly neighborhoods of color being overcharged, where the neighborhoods that are predominantly white, a lower level of neighborhoods of color or folks of color, less problems. So there's a massive over extraction of wealth from low income households, residents, predominantly households of color. We did check into the appeals process as well. We've seen the same thing that, and again, this is in the book, that if you're white, you're more likely to get an appeal. And there's been a decrease of value in the appeals process where our county has given away $170 million of value. So that shows you the perversity of the assessment system. So just to close, we're going to make some recommendations in this. One is you should be doing assessments more frequently. The assessors actually want that. They want the data. They want to keep things updated. That will help everybody. So advocate for that. It's counterintuitive, but it'll help your community. You want to precede annual reassessments with comprehensive inspections of properties. You should know what's going on and analyze them. You want to overhaul the appeals process, possibly fund third-party groups. Our county, to their credit, has done this, and they've reached out to Pisgah Legal Services to help citizens appeal. You want to exercise a clawback provision if your state has one, and most states do. So make sure that that's being followed. And you want to unequivocally commit to transparency and integrity in the system. We should all be having the same conversation, and yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. And then you want to compensate residents who are adversely impacted. We've shown the money that needs to come back to the community. We have a reparations fund organization that should be funded and capitalized to best invest that in our community. So here's our roll up of what we've got and our recommendations. Those will be in our report. You can scan this this QR code if you'd like. We can also have this as part of the PDF, and I am over time and we'll stop. Thank you.
I'm very impressed at the speed with which you went through those millions of slides. And yeah, for those who are watching and feverishly trying to take notes or something, don't worry, we will be releasing all this in our final report. And there's also a summary that's a little bit more concise version too. So thank you so much, Joe. Now I'd like to bring Rob Thomas on. Rob is the executive director of the Asheville Racial Justice Coalition. He's facilitated and been a keynote speaker in dozens of community events, and also works as an advisor and consultant, particularly on reparations issues around the country. So Rob, you've been a partner in this project. Can you talk a bit about the work of the Racial Justice Coalition, particularly around housing equity issues and the process of getting reparations in connection with housing issues?
Yes, excuse me. So as Joe had stated, he came to me over a year or so ago, well, not just to me, but to our organization, the Racial Justice Coalition here in Asheville, North Carolina, and gave us a great presentation on the inequities in the tax appraisal system and the systemic biases there inherent to it. And as he had stated, we did go ahead and start a little bit of our advocacy then. We'd advocated to the county, and they had created a committee to look at it in depth, and that the committee just ended up rubber stamping the process that was currently going on. We didn't have the current political and social capital. We didn't have the right amount of political and social capital then. And so since then, Joe has been finding out more data and giving us more data sets and things of that nature, and also identifying some solutions. And we've been phasing in a lot of the information that he's told us into a lot of our events. We've had events in all of the historic Black communities. We've had other events, we've had online events, and we just phased all this messaging into what we were already doing with our community engagement to get more awareness created, and also to have the ability to mobilize people later on towards a bigger action. So a lot of base building has been going on. Where we're at now in the process, as Joe has said, our top priority within the Racial Justice Coalition has been reparations. Reparations has been divided into 5 impact focus areas: education, public safety, economic development, health and wellness, and of course, housing. And within these 5 IFAs, each IFA is going to submit short-term, immediate, short-term, and long-term recommendations. And we're looking at this entity because this entity was not fully established when we first started our advocacy. We're looking at this entity as a viable vehicle to have the type of political and social capital that we need to receive attention and some justice in the situation by pushing it through IFA, the housing IFA, and allowing them to adopt some of the recommendations that Urban 3 has come with to rectify the situation. And I would also like to point out that, in my reparations work, one of the things I like to show is how a lot of the times if we address the inequities that are currently affecting Black people, because I'm looking for reparations for the Black community, it benefits a larger parts of the community as well. So you don't just lift up Black people by buying in and implementing reparations. There are several different ways that it benefits the whole community, from gross domestic product to inequities that are more divided by capital status, how much money you have. But that's where we're at right now. I would say the immediate recommendations in the housing IFA, their immediate recommendation is going to be a large one, which is land back that was taken through urban renewal, where what Joe just showed, the redlining and all those things. Urban renewal is where they came and they took the lands that were redlined and declared blights on the community. But we're looking to get that land back in control of the commission, and there's a full focus, and a lot of their energy capacity is focused on that. The recommendations that are being coming up with right now will be in the second iteration of recommendations that come out from the housing IFA. And that will give us more time to base, build, and organize. And, this entity has been vested as a representative of the Black community. So it by itself has a lot of political and social capital. Other people, please get involved. Like I said, these on our listserv, we will be looking to mobilize and activate community members within the next few months. So please log on to rjcavl.org, join our listserv. We also have gapavl.org, which is where we break down the city and county agendas and send out things that are red flag. And we also have everyblackvoice.org, which is simply related to our reparations movement and our work there.
Thanks so much. Yeah, this is a great example for folks that are watching this, whether you're, if you're in the Asheville area, then definitely plug into this work that RJC is doing. And if you're not, take it as inspiration. If you're hearing this presentation and thinking, these tax assessment issues are impacting people negatively in my community, maybe they're impacting you. This is an example of how you can step up and actually take action in response to that. Rob, I just wanted to ask one follow-up question, which is, when we think about reparations, the revelation that communities are being overassessed and income is being taken away from them in the process of home ownership. We know that home ownership is such a powerful way to build household wealth, to build generational wealth. I'm curious how you think about that, learning about the tax assessment inequities and how those can potentially harm people's ability to access housing and home ownership. What was your response to kind of this data being revealed and this inequity being revealed in relation to home ownership?
Yes, completely unsurprising, right? Like being a Black person inside of the housing system that exists inside of America. So completely unsurprising, but connected a lot of dots and gave me the information that I needed to have an informed opinion and be able to create informed solutions to the issue. So that right there, and I think it truly just outlines one of the issues within the housing system itself, where you have the lending institutions, you still have a form of blockbusting and steering, whereas if you look at the map, we truly live in what I call de facto segregation. And de facto segregation, one of the major ways it is created is through the housing market, where housing is the cornerstone, I believe, of a community or a civilization in general. And without that, you don't have the wealth to invest in business, to invest in education. You don't have a safe space to live in, so that you don't have a massive amount of adverse childhood experiences. And I could continue to go on, but even within the Reparations Commission itself, housing is viewed as probably one of the most important IFAs, simply because it is the cornerstone and it affects all of the other IFAs.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for taking time to share about all the work that you are doing at RJC. I put the link in there. That'll be in the follow-up email too for folks that want to learn more about the work that RJC is doing. Now I'm going to turn to Joe again for a conversation with Leah Rothstein. Ms. Rothstein is the co-author with Richard Rothstein of Just Action, a sequel to the popular book, The Color of Law. And Ms. Rothstein has worked on public policy, community change, from the grassroots to the halls of government, helping to reform community corrections policy, consulting with nonprofit developers, and community organizing around safety and justice, to name just a few things. So Joe, I will hand it to you for some discussion about Leah's new book, Just Action.
Thank you. Well, first I want to start by thanking you for bringing the book to this world. And you know, when you read Color of Law and you see how entrenched the system, back to Rob's comments, that this is essentially an apartheid that's been designed into the system, not just one system. It's not just property assessment. It's many different silos of government that I don't want to use this word lightly, but it conspires to make us an economic system. It's frustrating when you go and you run the evidence like this, because then you get into, well, now what? And you know, this is a list of solutions and things that you can do. So if I guess my first question is, what would you recommend to Rob? Is he on the right path, or how do you stay with the work that he's doing? We're more just producing the evidence to show it, but what would be your recommendations going forward?
I mean, exactly what you're all doing, I think, is what I would recommend, and what our book is focused on is, you know, we had a massive outpouring of support for Black Lives Matter demonstrations in 2020 across the country, 20 million people marching in those demonstrations. And then many of them went home and put Black Lives Matter signs on their front lawns or started book clubs, and didn't go on to then address these kinds of issues that you're talking about in their communities, the issues that not only maintain segregation, but continue to create racial disparities based on policies that are discriminatory in effect, even if not in intent, like the property tax assessment systems. And so we wrote this book to help all of those people who, you know, say they support racial justice and racial equity, to give them some ideas of what they can do in their own communities to start to begin to redress segregation. And that means not only changing policies and practices that continue to maintain segregation in our communities, but also address these disparities that exist as a consequence of segregation. And so we give dozens of policy strategy ideas, policies and strategies to address on the local level. We focus very much on the local level. And so doing that is exactly what you're doing, collecting the evidence to show, you know, a lot of people think that segregation is over, discriminatory policy is over. We have the Fair Housing Act, we can't discriminate in housing. But this property tax assessment issue is one of many examples of a policy that's racially neutral on its face, but has a huge racial disparate impact on African Americans. And so we have to address those policies. And these are all, you know, this is a policy that's under local control. And it's not going to change just by the evidence. You know, we need the evidence in order to inspire people to act, but then we need local organizations and people activated to then put pressure on their local officials to change the systems and to demand repair and, you know, refunds for all of that overtaxation that people have experienced for years.
I was going to save this question for the end, but I'm just going to go ahead and start with this. This is, you know, we're speaking in an audience of grassroots activists, community activists, folks in strong towns are not unfamiliar with stepping forward and doing something in their community. It's not just property assessment. This is zoning, land use decisions, how we run our government. Mm-hmm. There's lots of barriers that are put up to give access to certain individuals and deny access to others. What time you hold a meeting is another example. You know, for those in the audience, what keeps you hopeful of staying the course, that this is a marathon, not a sprint? There's a comment you made in the book that this was a system that was put in place in 50 to 100 years.
Right.
Should we wait 50 to 100 years that this is how long the marathon is going to take, or how do you accelerate that process?
I don't know how long it will take, but I do know that it was many decades that went into creating it and many policies. It wasn't just one thing that created the system we live in, and it's not going to be one thing that will undo it. And so it's just this sometimes slow, methodical, strategic organizing that begins to undo it. And so I started this project with my dad a few years ago. I've worked in housing policy, I've worked in community organizing. I read The Color of Law like a million other people, and my brain was blown by the history that I wasn't taught. And then I asked him afterwards, like many other people, now that we know about this, what do we do about it? Because it doesn't seem like there's a path forward to undo it. And so he challenged me and asked me to help him write this book. And I started the project feeling pretty overwhelmed and not sure that we would actually come up with solutions to this overwhelming issue, intractable, patterns of how we live. And through the research for the book, I actually come out of it very hopeful, because for all of the dozens of policies and strategies we outline in the book, we give an example of a community that's successfully implementing that. So there's people all over the country working on this, chipping away at all of the pieces and institutions and structures that maintain this system of segregation. So we often get questions, when we're out talking about this book about like, what's the one thing we can do, or what's the magic bullet? And unfortunately, it's not that simple, but there's a lot that can be done. We just don't lack for options. There's tons of policies, locally controlled policies and programs that can begin to undo this system. So I am hopeful, because there's a lot of talk, and not just talk, but there is a lot of action happening around the country. And so we hope to amplify those stories, provide hope to people reading about them, and hopefully inspire people that it might not be easy, but it's possible to make change. And we just have to keep on keeping on. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I muted again. I actually want to come back to a quote that I typically use. Is actually a friend of mine here in Asheville. His name is Dwayne Barton, who lives in the Burton Street neighborhood, and he's a neighborhood activist. And he says, when we try to address inequity, we talk about it in silos, but we need to address it the same way it was implemented. It was policy, blood, and resources, all the way from the feds right down into the neighborhoods itself. And it trips me out that we're not addressing the problem the same way. That I think that your book does that. It talks about, it's almost like a silo by silo systems of breaking it down, and it will take a concerted effort. I think that Rob brings that point forward as well, is that it's not just one piece, it's all connected together. In addressing is it just, do we start one at a time, or is it find what you can focus on first? Like, what would be some advice in that?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, so in Just Action, we say that we need to begin by building biracial, multi-ethnic groups where we have social contact, social capital. We, get to know each other so we can work together on these issues, start to learn about our community's particular history. Every community has been segregated in similar ways, but every community is slightly unique in how it's played out and what the opportunities are to affect change around it. So there isn't one way to start in any community. It's not going to be the same across the country, but finding what is one thing that is motivating to people in your neighborhood that they want to start working on, and then start there. And it can be, we span the range from, addressing zoning issues, which can be huge, metropolitan area fights, to starting down payment assistance funds, addressing property assessment issues, or addressing, just to add to this issue, is what happens when people fall behind on paying their property taxes. Is then often localities sell that tax debt to investors, private investors, who in return for paying the government their needed back taxes, they get to collect exorbitant interest rates from homeowners and then foreclose on their homes and take their homes in the process. So we can start by addressing the outcomes, sort of the impact of these unfair assessment systems, by helping ensure that people don't lose their homes for a small back, unpaid taxes. Or another example is starting a right to counsel program for tenants who are facing evictions so that they have legal representation in those processes. So that can be fairly simple, getting a legal aid organization and a city to back, that all tenants or all low-income tenants facing evictions have a right to an attorney. So there's a huge range of ways we can begin to address it. And you're right. And what Rob said also is there, housing sort of underlies the communities that we live in, the houses where we have access to. It underlies all of our most serious social problems and racial inequities. And so it's like, forgive me for a, overused metaphor, but it's like an onion. There's so many layers of what goes into maintaining the system as it is. And so there's many layers to undo it. And you just have to start with one of them.
Well, also that you're not alone, there's as Rob is a perfect example. There are leaders in the movement to change that you can help. There are also other ally groups. In the case, we reached out to Habitat for Humanity to let them know, because here they are toiling away at getting people into affordable housing in neighborhoods that tend to be overtaxed. So you take somebody and put them into a house and you go, there you go. And then they turn around and pay too much money. Yeah. So it undermines their mission. They're totally aligned with what we're doing here and supportive. Even the National Association of Realtors local chapter has been supportive. And even there's some comments in the chat about whether or not this is a proper assessment, the tools that we use. Let me just be clear. I delivered sort of a cartoon version of the full report. If you want to see the full report, it's been properly vetted by the IAAO, and we followed all the rules and standards. What we've seen in the process is that, and this gets to maybe another question, in your chapter on assessment, you mentioned that that they have educated judgment in how they do things. One of the things that I wanted to show is that you may be educated, but your judgment is going to have a bias. And then if you're not even following your own policies, in the case, we have a law that was created in 1941 that no one was following, not just us, all 17 counties. So, don't assume that that there's all the rules are being followed here. But maybe I guess to turn that into a question for you is the systemic, realizing how to do the systemic change, do you focus on the education in the individual to change their culture, or do you focus on policies and procedures? So it's sort of like, which path do you use of awakening, or is it an all process in this?
I mean, I think all is necessary, but what's really going to make change is not what's in our hearts, but the policies that we have to live under. And so if it takes some education, it takes some re-education and confronting our own internal biases to get into this work. But then once we are, what really will affect change on a larger level is not our own thinking, but the policies that affect us. So we need to we need to take action and do more than, think about the issues and talk about them, but we need to affect change around them. So one is important for the other, but what's really going to matter to address these issues is making policy change and creating change on some structural levels.
Some of the advice that you have that I found very helpful. There's a discussion about how to approach the Supreme Court or constitutionality, how we tend to say that this is a sacred institution and you sort of gut it in the process. That was a little mind-blowing to me. But it's true. It's like these are rules and processes, and we should aspire for equality in the system and demand it. When I actually presented with Kagi, the assessor in Chicago, and one of the things that he brought up is the MLS system and the Freddie and Fannie Mae. And you bring it up in the book. I think it is worth challenging. Our federal government started a lot of this institutionalized problem, and we have the evidence with HOLC maps and all of that, the policies that were put in place and the practice. Now here they control Freddie and Fannie. And what Kiggy is saying is like, I want access to how they're doing appraisals.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that that's possible, that we could, that change? What would that effort entail to get the federal government to open that data?
Well, I think they're starting to. Biden started a task force around appraisal bias, and one of the outcomes of that task force was to make appraisal data and sales data public, so that we can start to analyze it and see where bias is occurring and how widespread it is. Because right now, in terms of appraisals, unlike property tax assessments, we only know when biased appraisals happen when people get their home appraised and then get, a white stand-in to look like the homeowner and get it reappraised, and there's a difference. So those are anecdotal evidence. But so it's called the PAVE task force. I can't tell you what it stands for, but it's an appraisal system analyzing what can be done better. And one of the recommendations out of that is making the data public, which I think is essential. Now, I'll just add to that, just to further drive home the point of our book, Just Action, is that, the federal government obviously had a huge role to play in setting up all of these systems and creating segregated communities and ensuring that we live apart from each other. But once those systems were established by the federal government, many of them, as we're seeing today, are enforced by local government. So even though the federal government does have a role to play in undoing all of this, there's, it's, despite this appraisal task force, there's little hope that the federal government is going to actually make these broad changes that we need. So we need to start building that political will locally to start to affect what we can change on the local level. And then eventually, hopefully that will lead to federal change. And to your point about our argument about the Supreme Court, we have a chapter in the book called Dare to Defy, and we sort of challenge racial justice activists to defy the Supreme Court, which is what other folks have done in the past. The Supreme Court has never been consistent on issues of racial equality. And so there's no reason we should ascribe to this idea that their answers are the end all be all of what we can and can't do. The civil rights movement activists defied local and federal law to demonstrate and call attention to that issue and help make broad sweeping changes. Abortion opponents, have defied Roe v. Wade for years until that then led to Supreme Court change. And now abortion proponents are defying Dobbs. So we defy the Supreme Court when we think it's the right thing to do. And we sort of challenge all of us who are looking to make change in this area to have the same courage and to have the courage to implement race-based solutions to these problems, because they are race-based crimes that we're remedying, and you can't remedy race-based crimes with race-neutral solutions.
I see that Rachel's back, so
yeah, now might be a good time to get into a few questions before we close out here. So a few, yeah.
Can I just add a couple of plugs? So there's an organization that was founded out of the color of law called the Redress Movement. It's fairly new, but they're placing organizers in communities across the country to help organize around these issues. There's an organizer in Charlotte. So Charlotte, Denver, and Milwaukee are where they're starting. Thanks. Yeah, so you can look into that there. And we also have a Substack column where we're continuing to write about these issues and hope to generate conversation and comments there and learn about what people are doing across the country. So I'll put the link to that in the chat and would love to, you can subscribe for free and just stay in conversation with us about all of this. Thanks for letting me plug those.
Yeah, no, thank you. I know some folks asked, what can I do next? What are some next resources to connect with? So
can I throw a question at Rob real quick?
Yeah.
One of the things that I've seen with Rob is that you have somebody that's tireless and pushing to do this. And as a friend, a colleague, as somebody that wants to support those organizations, support folks like Rob that are in your community that are pushing for this. It's not easy, it's not cheap, it's not fun. And it's just, it's Rob, what would you like for reaching out to an organization? Like, what's the best help that you could get as an activist?
You know, and I hate to be so stereotypical in the nonprofit industrial complex, but yeah, funding and money goes a long ways. It takes money to hold events in community and make them culturally and relevant and engaging. And it also takes staff hours, event planning, and actually being at the event for hours. And we do this multiple times throughout the month. So that alone, you know, the piece with the funding. The second piece is actually getting involved more directly, becoming a part of our listserv. Like I say, down the line, we will have some direct actions that we will be looking to do to move forward the recommendations of the various IFAs. And we plan to make, you know, these recommendations a part of those recommendations. And we will be looking to mobilize people, like I said, I would say within the next 90 days, specifically pertaining to this issue. We've already started base building as far as, you know, the popular education community engagement. But like I said, going to the listserv and also sharing the information. You know, that's another really big crucial piece to creating the awareness. You know, the RJC and other organizations like ours, that's a big piece of what we're trying to do, phase it into popular education and inform people, because people can then come together and make a difference. So those three things, funding, becoming part of our listserv so that we can mobilize you later on down the line to help create specific change in Asheville that could be, you know, duplicated and replicated in other localities, and also sharing the information. So now that you're informed, you know, having conversations. If you work in government, yes, it's a lot of things that you can do as far as helping facilitate change in your community.
So
Yeah.
Leah's had to drop off for another appointment. I guess, Rachel, what are the next steps on what maybe is if we can let the viewers know where we're rolling with this, the rollout of this campaign for the 17 counties and the next steps to pay attention to?
Yeah, so in terms of sharing the findings from this research, we'll be sending the executive summary out to everyone in your emails next week. And then the final report is we're still putting the final touches on it, so it'll be later this summer. And in terms of like action in Asheville, you both could probably speak better to that about what's next. Certainly, I'll put the link to our email list for Just Accounting too. We'll try to keep everyone informed about further events, community organizing, things like that. But yeah, are you? Was there like specific stuff you were thinking about?
No, just to pay attention, keep it going. This is
none
of this. Yeah, none of this is like, oh yeah, we'll have this done by January 24th. This is an ongoing campaign to change the system. And I think we need to be mindful of it didn't happen overnight. This was a lot of silos lining up, a lot of policies lining up. And again, I'll go back to that word. It's not a conspiracy theory. It was an actual conspiring of policy to make these things line up, to see that the maps lined up with the lending program and how we're doing our neighborhoods in the assessment process. These things are all aligned. The zoning matches it, you know, that there's all sorts of policies. It's going to take a long effort. But what we see, our role is if we can help deliver the information or evidence to support Rob in the organizations that are pushing here, they don't have the access to the software or the patience to kind of slog away at these policies. So we see it as our role to do that. I would challenge all other professionals on this webcast to do the same. Lend your, and we did this all pro bono for that first project to prove that existed. I will say, just for some of the chat comments, we did run this through the IAAO. We followed all the rules. We followed the processes. So you want to make sure that you're honest and intellectually rigorous about this. We do have other states and other cities that have now reached out that want to replicate this work. Ironically enough, in Texas, of all places, Fort Worth, Dallas, we just talked to El Paso, and the National Association of Realtors in that state is partnering to get the data out there. So talk to your area realtors. They own the fact that they were responsible for a lot of the stuff that's in the color of law that is not pleasant. The realtors were behind aligning a lot of this, and to their credit, they're stepping up and trying to help. So there are professional organizations that can be your asset and ally, that you can depend on. So you're not alone in this.
And in terms of, so several questions are in here asking about like who has oversight over assessors. If I notice this issue is happening in my city, which it probably is, who do I go to start like bringing this up and trying to change it? Who is that governing body?
In our case, in the state of North Carolina, it's the State Department of Revenue. And the State Department of Revenue was just accepting the reports that were handed in by the local assessors, and they weren't double checking them. And ironically enough, in Arkansas, of all places, they actually double check the math in Arkansas. So Arkansas is like more advanced than North Carolina no shade at Arkansas. We have good policies that we're not even enacting here in our state. So it's sort of like our state was asleep at the wheel. They did a lot of training to the assessors, but they never double checked on things like sales chasing, which is it's a term inside the trade, this thing called sales chasing that we saw evidence of. There's things that were just not standards of practice, that were habits that were passed forward that needed to be enforced. So our police officer here is the state. It's not the IAAO. That's just a trade organization that's helping with standards. They can't watch all the assessors across the countries doing their work.
Yeah.
Oh, in some states, your assessors are elected, and so you're the police of the assessor. Our assessor is appointed by our county commission, and we went to the county commission immediately with this data to have it interrogated.
So we're at the end of our time today, but thank you so much to everyone for joining us. Particularly thanks to the Dogwood Health Trust for sponsoring this whole initiative. And thank you to Leah Rothstein, who had to step off, for being our guest today. Thank you, Joe and Rob, for taking the time to share your insights and share about the work you're doing. And if you're interested in Leah's book, yes, it's called Just Action: How to Challenge Segregation, Enacted Under the Color of Law, and you can find it wherever books are sold. I'll make sure to have a link in that email that's going to go out to everyone on Monday. It'll have the recording, it'll have our executive summary, and all these resources that we just shared and linked to you all. And later this summer, we'll have that final report out. So thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Joe and Rob.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, take care.
See y'all around. Take care.